Hey, InfoSec Island, this is Anthony continuing my coverage down here in Las Vegas. I'm at B-Sides. They're getting ready to wrap up and party a little bit tonight. And I'm sitting down with Josh Corman and with Jericho from Attrition. And I'm going to talk to them a little bit about a series of articles they wrote discussing the anonymous movement. And basically the point was of writing it, Jericho?
I guess the biggest push for me is that we saw very poor coverage of Anonymous up until that point. Most of the journalists were missing the bigger issues. They were missing some of the really intellectual kind of advancements of what could or could not happen. And we saw the articles as a way to force them to advance the dialogue.
What kind of subject matter did you guys cover in there?
Early on, it started out. Well, let me back up. As of last year, the idea was, okay, this will be a 2,000-word article. The gist is building a better Anonymous, move forward. Then we had our panel last year. We started discussing it and said, well, there's probably going to be a multi-part article because there's so much to discuss. Jumped to a year forward, and it was an 8-part article with some of them reaching a considerable amount of words. It was to the point where several people asked us along the way if we should write a book. And we said, should we? Probably. Will we? Absolutely not.
And so, okay, let's start with the previous media coverage. As you indicated, it's gotten better. What was the media missing? Was it just the hype? Was it just the excitement of the?
They were looking at everything as one incident here, one incident there, and the only way they strung them together was, oh, it's the group Anonymous. Oh, they did this before. They did this. They may do it again. Well, that's really the baseline, and they were missing what could be better, what could be done. You know, Anonymous wasn't having a lot of effect in some ops, and they were in others. Well, why not? The media wasn't examining why they were successful sometimes, not other times, and they weren't looking at, well, what would make them better? And better meaning more successful, less collateral damage, you know, where it was basically a win for everyone.
Yeah, like, my big takeaway from the panel was we went in there with, you know, our own individual hypotheses of what Anon was doing and why they were doing it. And even between the 1 hour on stage and the 1 hour Q&A, I changed my mind on at least half the material because we got in an active dialogue with some of the guys that ran New Blood. There were probably like a half dozen Anons that identified themselves. So for me, the first piece of the series had to be that we see in Anonymous what we want to. So I saw that the press was projecting what they wanted to believe Anonymous was, even if it didn't conform to reality.
Well, isn't that kind of how Anonymous has presented themselves? Is that we're non-hierarchical. We are whoever we say we are and whatever we happen to be doing.
That's what they presented themselves, and that was not necessarily the truth. That was correct sometimes for some ops, but in other cases, as we later saw with LulzSec splintering off, coming back in, they had a definitive leader, and that leader was also a crossover leader. You know, Anonymous Sabu. People looked to him as a leader, whether he wanted to or not, and whether it was part of his job, you know, as an informant with the FBI, it doesn't much matter. The simple fact is there was a leader, and he was one of many.
Yeah, I think we also realized that there wasn't a single Anon. There were many pockets that weren't coordinated. So once we stopped attributing a single narrative to a single monolithic Anon, I think that also helped some of the press get things better. They could start to see that there wasn't a single motivational structure. So it was more of a composite and a brand and a franchise. We actually had Mar Williams rake an inkblot Rorschach, Guy Fawkes, and that might have been one of the most useful insights that we brought early on. Was
in a single image, it said so much, and just looking at that image made you realize, well, wait a minute, you know, what am I looking at and why? And wait a minute, this is my mind feeding the decision or, you know, the response to it. So yeah, it ended up being a great, you know, single image to summarize the series.
And you know, we didn't want to post it right away, but in the final installment that we just did, part 8, we actually archived the video of the panel from DEF CON and for the very first time, the audio of the Q&A that we had that really made us realize how far off we are. And there's all sorts of great nuggets in there. I mean, at one point they were saying, the press was saying, well, why do you hurt innocents with collateral damage when you do an attack? And they said, well, when we didn't do that, you never covered us. So we saw this really entangled relationship between them trying to do something to affect change without hurting innocents, got no press coverage. and they had to do something more aggressive to get press coverage.
Well, then, if you had to summarize, what are they trying to impact? What is their mission?
That's the thing. You can't say what is their mission. Their speaks to a single, mythical anonymous that simply does not exist.
I mean, because it kind of started out with the anti-copyright movement was really
some of them did.
The genesis and
and that's the thing is that those pockets, sometimes it was a bigger representation of the group, sometimes it was smaller, but it was never 100% of the group. And that's where people would come in and they would volunteer and say, I want to be part of this op, but that op? No, I'm not going to touch that. I don't believe in that. But they still saw the benefit of being in this big group that would strategically reach out and work on these different, agendas.
One thing we haven't said is we also, maybe this wasn't your motive, one of my motives was to get Anon talking, get them engaged, and we tried to treat it as honest analysis that would cause conversation. So at first they were skeptical and even angry that we were writing. You might recall back then they were punishing, some of them were punishing
on the early articles they reacted strongly.
Yeah. But then they started to say, well, maybe these guys are onto something. And then later on they started commenting more freely. We got like a 5-page letter from one Anon fan in LA saying why she loved Anonymous and how it spoke to her. And so we saw all the different motivational structures, and at some point they were kind of prodding us saying, when's the next one coming out? When's the next one coming out? So it was much more useful for us to point out things that they were going to encounter that were going to make their lives harder and maybe offer them some solutions. And it wasn't to make them better at being bad. It was if we can help them avoid some of the things that are plaguing them, and in the process of them being a better Anon, they're also doing less collateral damage, hurting less innocent folks, scaring decision makers and policy makers less. Because we kind of saw that this could easily spiral and escalate to a point where their attempts to stop censorship were going to cause more censorship. Their attempts to stop surveillance were going to cause a next-gen cyber patriot act.